measures, and there's a little bit where I feel that for a long time, for most of my career, I've stood up at meetings and said the government is attacking the health service and it's fundamentally affecting it. But we are now at the point where the scale that they are attacking is such that the health service is failing to behave safely towards the patients that arrive at its doors at any one day. So much so that over the Christmas period, the Red Cross declared an official humanitarian disaster in the English NHS system. And in a way, I think that's I think you have to repeat it because it's an indication. I thought they were joking when someone told me that. I thought it was an April Fool type joke. But the state of the health service is such that they declared the English health service a humanitarian disaster because there were so few available beds across the whole of the English NHS that if people arrived at casualty, their ability to be treated was put in serious question. I know paramedics who've spent their whole 12-hour shift sat with somebody in a trolley waiting for somebody from A&E to pick them up and to take them off their hands so that they can go and get the next person who they can't bring to that hospital because that hospital is closed to emergencies. The NHS has 5 statuses of codes that it does. It does green, amber, orange, red, and it's now got what it calls black alert, which we never used to have black alerts. Black alerts are when a hospital is so seriously threatened, and they've been through the amber and the red alerts where managers and top directors have put everything that they possibly can to make it safe, and the black alert says it is still not safe for patients who are currently in the hospital, never mind the fact that we closed it to anybody new coming in, including people with planned operations. Black alert happens in health hospitals in England, up and down the country, all the time. I was talking to somebody in Bolton where I work, and they said we've not been off red alert for as long as I can remember, for over a year, and we are now increasingly on black alert, where they officially say that we will put patients at harm. And I think that that is a consequence of government policies that go back quite a long time now in relation to the health service, that started actually in the Labour government in the late 70s in a small way, which was the very first government to cut the health service, but have been escalated by the Condem government in 2010 and by the Tory government since 2015 on a scale that is absolutely unprecedented. We're now told that there is a £30 billion funding gap between what the health service needs and what it actually gets out of a budget of 120 billion. So that's nearly a 25% funding gap on what it needs. And because of that, they're actually making proposals now. People might have heard of STPs, which I thought was a sexually transmitted disease, but turns out to be even worse, something nasty that the Tory want to inflict on the health service. And what they're saying is they can no longer trust each hospital to cut its own anymore because it's been so cut to the bone. There isn't any room to do that. So they want groups of hospitals to get together so that they can in effect dismantle the hospital system that we've known since the Second World War. So those plans are talking about a third of them are going to downgrade or close A&Es and cut urgent care centres. Half are going to cut hospital beds even further. Half are going to close community hospitals, and the money for which won't actually go to the Treasury. If you make money out of selling a hospital, it goes to the Department of Health Treasury, they give it to the Treasury, and it counts as hospital spend, even though it's money that you've given them rather than money that you spent. They want 25% cut in the acute staff who work in sort of acute wards and hospitals. And they're saying very, very clearly in the tiny small print of those plans that they want smaller hospitals, fewer beds. And people will travel up to 60 or 70 miles for appointment, to visit their relatives, or to get to a hospital in an emergency. Why? Because they say that people don't want to be in hospital. When they do surveys, they say to you, would you like to be in hospital? And do you know what? Most people say no. right? And they use this as evidence to suggest that we don't want as many hospitals as we've got. Rather than thinking, if it's to be in hospital, it probably means I'm ill. And I don't want to be ill, so I don't want to be in hospital. And the amount of deceit and lies and Orwellian nonsense that they use to dress up the cuts that they're making. So they're not even admitting their cuts, they're pretending that they're an improvement in patient care. There is no evidence to back up the myth that if you are looked after in the community, you will not need to be admitted into hospital. But despite that, they are using that to create more and more closures of beds. And at the same time, they are rationing care. So the contracts that the health service makes the criteria for treatment higher and higher. So if you're in acute pain when you walk because your hip needs replacing, you now have to be unable to get up the stairs to bed before they will fund your hip replacement on the NHS. And the encouragement is for you to borrow the £5,000 and go into a private hospital and have it done, which increasingly people has done. Chiropody, where you have your toenails cut, you have verrucas and other things dealt with, has virtually been disbanded on the NHS, and there is a huge growth in private. And people who are diabetics, who if they cut their toenails wrong, can end up getting gangrene and having a leg amputated and costing the NHS and themselves an awful lot, have been saved that little bit of money from the health service at their own cost because they're expected to pay for it privately. In practice, people can't afford to pay for it privately. They're not cutting their toenails properly, and they're ending up with their legs off as a result, and it is an absolute tragedy. So that's one way in which they are cutting the NHS, literally not giving it enough money in order to survive. The second big way that they are attacking the health service is privatising. I mean, when I started in the health service, we were basically a public service in 1982. When Thatcher came in, she succeeded in bringing in the privatisation and the marketisation of ancillary workers, porters, domestics, catering staff such as that. This government is now privatising on a scale that's unbelievable. So there's a whole cancer care contract for a whole county that's up for a private bid. Virgin Care is put into its Circle, a whole number of others. They gave a whole hospital to Circle because it was failing. And well, what a surprise. A year later, Circle, having taken the money out of it for a year, said, oh, we can't make it work, either you can have it back, and the health service had to have it back. There is more and more privatisation of mainstream healthcare. So if you need to go for a gastroscopy where you have a camera down your throat into your stomach, you will now be offered a range of choices. Do you want to go here, there or there or there? And 3 or 4 of the choice of 5 will be a private sector company that's got the contract to do that and will be paid according to how many people want to go. £8.7 billion of the NHS budget, they reckon, went directly into private sector profits. So they're creaming off the charges that they made versus the profits on top of it, and the £8.7 billion was wasted. There's a number of other figures, but you probably won't remember them, but they are quite galling and quite disgraceful. And the third way that they're attacking the health service is the attacks on staff. People will remember the junior doctors and their attacks on unsocial hours, wanting them to work weekends and evenings for even less than they work at the moment. And that's something that's coming for all the staff, where that's definitely on the cards for what they want to do with us. We're now in our 7th year of a 1% pay restraint policy, which means health workers have generally lost 17% in real terms of their wages. And as a consequence, more and more staff are leaving. Working in the health service, when there should be 8 of you on a ward and there's only 4, means that shift is hell. It's hell for the patients who don't get proper care, but it's hell for the staff who have to look and think, well, I can't do you, and I can't do you, and I can't do you. God, I better do you really quick. And I know you're crying, but crying's not a priority. You haven't had your drugs yet. And it is soul destroying to work in it. and it is soul destroying when they make you work increasingly crazy shifts. All ward staffs have to work day and night shifts and weekends. You can't work just nights or just weekends or whatever suits you. So more and more people are leaving, and that's then used as an excuse to close down services because it's not safe, because we haven't got enough staff, or to pay agency staff a ludicrous amount of money. And again, the cost of agency staff is 3.7 billion, is the extra it costs, because loads of staff are employed on an agency because they won't pay you full time because they haven't got enough money, even though it costs them more money to do it through agency. And really, workers have three sources of income in the world of capitalism. You have your direct wage that you get paid in a wage packet through your bank, and you have your indirect wage, sort of two forms. One is the deferred wage of your pension, which increasingly is gone. But the third way that you get income is the social wage, which is the wage that pays for the welfare state, those things that are provided socially rather than you having to pay for them individually. And the Tories are now saying that those things are unaffordable, just like free students, education for students is unaffordable, legal aid is unaffordable, benefits are unaffordable. They are using an argument saying time and time again that the health service is unaffordable. And I think I want to make very, very clear that the health service is not unaffordable to the sixth richest country in the world. It is a political choice that this government is making, that when the economic crisis happened in 2007-8, right, that the Tories have used that in order to get rid of and change the things that they never wanted in the first place. They never wanted a free health service, free at the point of delivery for everybody and provided delivery. They did actually want a bit of a health service, so they were forced to support it in 1948 when it was created, and there were reasons for that. In the 30s, there was really high unemployment, and it didn't really matter if a third of workers weren't fit to work, because there wasn't enough work, because there was a world recession and a big recession in Britain going on at the same time. 1945, there was a long economic boom, and every worker who was in work was making bosses lots and lots of money. So the more of us who were in work, the more money they worked. So they wanted us to be fit, they wanted us to be healthy, so they wanted a health system. And that health system had been created in a way in the Second World War, because they needed fit people to fight the war, to be soldiers, to make the armaments, to work on the land. And they continued with that system and made it official in 1948. And it suited them to some extent, although there was always an argument about we want a health service. We don't necessarily want it to be a national health service that we pay for that's public. And that's an argument that the Tories have had ever since. But at the time when it was set up, and even when I started again back in 1982, it was an incredibly efficient system. The admin costs when I started were 4% of the cost of the health service. So only 4% was spent on administration. And I'll give you an indication of why that might be. This is the old NHS structure that I was brought up in. You've got a little picture of it on your diagram. On the one that's in black and white, it's very small. But that's what the NHS management used to look like, and this is what it looks like now. And when you look at the difference, you can see why the admin costs, which is about an introduction of the market. It's about, in order to do my job, I don't just have to be employed to say there are people who've got mental health problems, will you provide some talking therapy for them? Some idiot writes out a tender, about 10 people apply, groups of hospitals and private sector and charities apply for the tender. There's a whole tender process where people do presentations. One of us wins the tender. We then have to prove that we're delivering on the tender. We have to prove we're only delivering on the tender and not on anything else that wasn't tendered that isn't in our bit of the contract. And all that army of the PFI, of the marketisation, all cost the NHS an absolute fortune. So admin costs are now at 17-18% and growing. In America, where the privatisation is much more endemic, even with Obamacare, admin costs are over 30% of the cost of healthcare. So the health sort of insurers that pay it, question the hospitals that are charging every pill, every bed bath, every injection is queried as to whether it's necessary. And actually, it's really bad for you to have that sort of system, because it's in your interest as a private hospital to give you an X-ray you don't need and to charge you or your insurance or the contract for it. It's in the interest of the hospital to give you an operation you don't need in order to charge for it and make money. And one of the problems with American healthcare is that America, despite spending 3 times as much as we pay on health service, has some of the worst healthcare in the world and has some of the lowest life expectancy, not just for the poor people at the bottom who can't afford it, but actually for the people at the top who are given too much healthcare that they don't need and is not going to do them any good, and they don't live as long as a result either. It's a madness of making health service something that has a profit motive in it, but actually there's an interest in them doing that. And that's the second reason now, is that they still want fit workers, but they've got a better plan for the NHS. They want us to pay for it ourselves. There is a real shortage in the world. The rate of profit has gone down, so the profitability of companies, if you set up a company, you invest in it, how much money you get back has gone down. There is a world economic sort of, recession going on, and they see health and social care as an area that is a new market that companies can move into, that opens up some areas where they can make profit. And so healthcare, which has been part of the EU policy, it's been part of the American policy, it's been part of the World Trade Organization policies to open up the whole areas of the welfare state to privatisation, is one that's partly an attempt to try and solve the problem of economic deficit, with us paying the price for our healthcare rather than paying through taxes and the rich pay and when we need it. So they're looking for markets. And that's one of the reasons why they want to do the privatisation, and they use the rundown of it as part of a reason to win us to your healthcare's rubbish. And actually, even though the NHS is great, at times it is rubbish because we haven't got enough staff to be good, and they use that to try and justify. In the same way as the old British Rail at times was rubbish, and they used that to win people to think, well, let's privatise it, and that didn't improve it, but made it worse. The third reason that I think the Tories think that they can attack and not fund the NHS is because they think workers are weak. I think they don't believe that we will actually fight back and defend it. Partly because I think Labour has gone along with that we have to sort out the problem of the deficit, we have to have a balanced budget, we promise not to spend too much money, we will be prudent, we will do all those sort of horrible words that Labour have used over the last sort of 30 years really, in order to give some lip service to opposition to what the Tories are doing, while actually accepting the fundamental principle, which is you have to balance your books first and we will get what's left afterwards. And I think that, pre-2008 and the banking crisis, Labour still supported PFI, Labour was still implementing cuts, we still had a market within the health service, although it was better than under the Tories, it wasn't an awful lot better. But now, even now, Jeremy Corbyn, right, wants to fund a health service and he stood on the platform of wanting to, but a large number of MPs think he should be more prudent, he should be more careful, So Labour undermining, there was a very sad poll which actually said that people trusted Theresa May with the health service more than they trusted Jeremy Corbyn. And you think, what sort of sadness is it where that's the way that Labour capitalising to the idea that somehow you need to break even has left them. Second reason why I think that workers are weak is because the trade unions for a long time have allowed the Tories to get away with murder. And I do think that we fought over pensions, we fought over pay, and each time health workers rose to the challenge. We're not necessarily brilliantly well organised, but we did come out on strike, we did mobilise, we did organise, and each time our trade union leaders, when we had a real chance of breaking the government over their austerity package and their attacks on the welfare state, ended up backing off. Junior doctors, fantastic sort of campaign, and a real sort of, ability to win. And what did the other health unions did? They sat on their hands and did nothing and left the junior doctors to it, knowing that they were coming for us first. And I think that's left sort of, the Tories believing that they can get away with it and they can do whatever that they want, that we're not going to fight back. And that's why, even though they know what's happening is outrageous, and more people know what's happening is outrageous, they somehow think that they can get rid of it. And I do think that there is a policy which George Osborne was very clear about, Mr. 6 jobs. Each of which earns 10 times what I seem to earn. Never mind one job earning 10 times what I earn. But he spoke of permanently reducing the welfare state to before the post-war consensus, because he was arguing it would never be affordable again. And I want to sort of put some arguments about affordability. I referred before, England, Britain, is the 6th richest country in the world, right? There are only 5 more countries out of the 200 approximately who have more wealth than us. If we can't afford a health service, nobody can, right? It is a joke. Of course we can afford a health service. We spend below average GDP. There's a graph again about how much we spend on health on the little bit, the one that looks like that. In terms of how much we spend, and it's quite shocking that we spend less than the average, we spend less than the EU average, and we spend less than a number of countries who are certainly not wealthier than us. When they wanted to deal with the post-banking crisis, they did what they called quantitative easing, which is they printed billions and billions and billions and billions of pounds. I just printed them. Right? They bailed out the banks, they somehow found it. And I just think, why can they never find that money when it comes to bailing out things that I actually value? And that's because it's a political choice. And in a way, when you look at I think it's £1 trillion they reckon that the government printed, 30 billion for the NHS doesn't actually sound very much in the scheme of that. The second place they could get the money from, right, is they could get it from the rich. You'll be pleased to know it's been a record year for billionaires in the last year. Right? We used to have in England 66, and we've now got 100 in a year. We've got an extra 34 billionaires, and their wealth went up £56 billion. So if you think the money's not there, it is nonsense. £56 billion in the hands of just those 100 billionaires. That's how much richer they got. Not how much wealth they got, but how much richer they got. British businesses make more every year, and therefore they can spend more if they want to, but they choose not to. The government chooses, right, when it's cutting the health service, to pay for a replacement for Trident. And the cost of that, I quote figures and then it goes up. I think the last was about 130, 140 billion, but I can't remember what the current number is. They can afford nuclear power, more and more sort of nonsense despite the huge cost of decommissioning. They can afford wars in wherever seems to be likely to cause the most trouble. They seem to have money, and no one ever says, can we afford it? Can we afford the planes? Can we afford the bombs? All those industries are subsidised, and yet they're reluctant to spend money on the health service. They could end privatisation of the internal market. Do you know how much that would release? £22 billion. So we wouldn't even need to spend more on the health service. If we just got rid of this bollocks and put this stuff back, right, and took the PFI contracts off them, they've had enough money, they've had the money's worth, just take it off them, £22 billion, which is all the money that we need until 2010. But they won't do it. Why? Because it's their mates that are making money, and they think that they want to be their bargain. So for the Tories, it's a choice. I don't know what time is.
Yeah, just a minute or two.
Okay. I'm just going to do a last bit about blaming. They want to blame patients for being too fat, too sort of smoking, not doing enough exercise, and using that as an excuse to ration. They want to blame people for living too long. What a bloody crime that is, eh? You've got the cheat to live a little bit longer, and that's going to cost them a little bit more. They want to blame migrants, and yet the figures are absolutely overwhelming. They want to cut 20% of the NHS budget. The amount that migrants cost is 0.3%, even on their figures, and yet they somehow want to blame migrants when you can't get a hospital bed or an appointment to see your doctor. And I think if they get away with charging migrants, they'll make charging something that happens, and there's a whole system set up now for us to do it for migrants. If we can do it for migrants, we can do it for anybody, and charging will become part of the course. And there's already, you hear it all the time from Tories, charging to go to GP, charging to do this, charging to do that, and it makes it legitimate. And what's true is you are more likely to be treated by a migrant worker than you are to be competing with a hospital appointment or a GP appointment or bed with a migrant worker. They are not the people responsible, and they want to blame us staff for being greedy and having gold-plated pay pensions and everything else. But all that scapegoating is an attempt to move away from the real culprits. People might have heard of Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman killed approximately 250 people. There was this figure out that came out a couple of weeks ago. Jeremy Hunt's cuts over the last 7 years, right, killed 30,000 people last year. He is a mass murderer because he knows he's doing that. He knows hospitals are on black alert. He is not known for being a mass murderer. It's Harold Shipman that we know, and that is something criminal. And that's the bad news. The bad news is that, you know, it's difficult. The bad news is trade unionists aren't even allowed to, if I was a health worker, I can't go on strike in defence of the health service because that is a political strike and it's a crime for which my union would be fined. I can go on strike for myself, but then I'm just being a greedy bastard, so I'm not supposed to do that either. But I do think there is a growing mood as people see the cracks in the NHS get bigger and bigger. You can see more and more people are not prepared to let it happen. In a way, the health service sums up what socialists want in a world where you provide it, not whether you can afford it, but whether you need it, and you pay for it whether you can afford it, so you pay in according to what you've got, not according to what you need. And I think that the NHS sums up for people the sort of world that we think we should have, that the Tories are taking away. And I think what's so heartening is beginning to see a real growth in health campaigns amongst communities. And I think our task is to take the confidence of those huge demos into the hospitals in order to give confidence to the staff, in order to begin to unite workers and people who use the services in defence of them. I'll leave you with one very interesting fact, which is the Royal College of Nursing have today, in the nursing standard, announced that they're going to ballot staff over industrial action over the 1% pay offer. So whilst Unison's walking away, the Royal College of Nursing are recognising that people are so pissed off, even they are talking about action. And I just think we should have some real hope that I think the NHS, out of all the things that they do, is one of their real weak spots, and I think we have an advantage to combine the confidence and anger of some of the communities with the knowledge that people have inside and the anger that people have inside, in order to really begin to shift what this government's doing, the whole austerity challenge, and begin to create a world that really does deliver for people what they need, not what we can make money out of.